So here's a huge question, one that sits at the very heart of our modern world. How do we create laws that everyone can agree are fair and just, especially when we disagree so deeply on things like religion, morality, and what it even means to live a good life? Well, today we're going to dive into how one philosopher, John Rawls, came up with a radical answer to this ancient problem.
It really all kicks off with this classic puzzle. I mean, think about it. If a government passes a law that you think is deeply, profoundly immoral, let's say a law that enforces segregation, do you still have a moral duty to follow it? Is that even a real law? For centuries, this question has been the driving force behind the search for a solid foundation for law.
And historically, the answers kind of fell into two main camps. On one side, you've got legal positivism. This idea basically says, look, a law is a law if it comes from the right authority. Whether it's moral or not is a totally separate question. But on the other side, you have the natural law tradition, which argues that, no, for a human law to be legit, it has to connect to some kind of higher, universal moral truth.
Let's dig into that second idea for a second, because honestly, it was the dominant answer for thousands of years. This is the idea that real, true law isn't something we just make up. It's something we discover.
The thinking went something like this. The reason our laws have any real power over us, why we feel we should obey them, is because they're reflecting some timeless moral order. You know, this could be the word of God, the fundamental rules of human nature, or some other deep reality. So a law against murder isn't just a convenient rule, it's legitimate because it plugs into a fundamental truth of the universe.
And right there, that's the massive problem for modern societies. In a world where people of goodwill have totally different and often conflicting religious and philosophical beliefs, how on earth do we agree on what that higher law actually says? If my sacred text tells me one thing and your philosophy tells you another, whose version gets written into law?
This is the exact challenge that the American philosopher John Rawls decided to tackle head-on, and his solution was nothing short of a revolution in how we think about justice.
Rawls's big idea was this. Let's just stop trying to base our laws on a specific religious or metaphysical belief that not everyone shares. What if, instead, we could build a shared moral framework from the ground up, using a tool that we all have in common? And that tool is reason. It's a shift from discovery to construction.
To pull this off, he came up with this brilliant thought experiment. Imagine you and a group of people get to design the basic rules for a new society, the Constitution, the courts, the whole deal. This starting point is what he calls the original position. But here's the twist. You have to choose these rules from behind a veil of ignorance. And from that totally fair starting point, you come to a rational agreement. The best analogy, it's like you're designing the rules of a game, but you have absolutely no idea which player you're going to be when the game starts.
Now, what this veil of ignorance hides is what makes it so powerful. You don't know your race. You don't know your gender. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor. You have no idea if you'll be a star athlete or if you'll be born with a disability. And maybe most importantly, you don't even know what your own religious beliefs or personal philosophy will be. All these things that are just accidents of birth are stripped away to make sure your choices are completely impartial.
Now, you're not completely clueless behind the veil. You know general things about how society works, a little economics, a little psychology. You know that resources will be limited. And you also know that everyone wants certain primary goods, things like rights, opportunities, and basic liberties, the stuff that's useful no matter what you want to do with your life. So the question becomes, what's the smartest, safest bet? What rules would you pick to make sure you get a fair shake no matter who you turn out to be? So what's the end result of this whole exercise? Well, it's not a specific list of laws. Instead, it's a completely new way of thinking about how we justify our laws to each other.
And that new framework is called public reason. Think of it as the new rule book for political debate. When we're arguing about the really big stuff, like constitutional rights or basic justice, we agree to only use reasons and values that any free and equal citizen could reasonably be expected to accept. So that means you don't argue from your specific religious text or personal philosophy. Instead, you appeal to shared political values that we can all get behind, like freedom, equality, and fairness.
And this quote just nails it. This is the heart of Rawls' solution, his liberal principle of legitimacy. It says that the state's power over you, its ability to tax you, arrest you, make laws you have to follow, is only legitimate if the reasons for those laws are things that everyone, as a reasonable citizen, can get on board with. The authority of the law doesn't come from God anymore. It comes from the shared reason of the people themselves.
So where does all this lead?
What Rawls has given us is a new foundation for a just society, one that's built for the modern world and doesn't have to rely on the old ways of thinking.
This table really makes the contrast crystal clear. The old natural law tradition, that was a top-down system. Morality was something you discovered out there in the world. Its laws were based on a comprehensive doctrine. That's just Rawls's term for a single, all-encompassing worldview, like a religion. But Rawls, he flips the script. He gives us a bottom-up moral order, one that we construct together using reason. The basis of law isn't some higher power, it's a shared, public reason that's acceptable to everybody, no matter what their private beliefs are.
At the end of the day, Rawls gives us a path to having a deeply moral foundation for our laws without forcing us all to agree on the deepest, most personal questions of existence. The legitimacy of our laws is grounded in this idea of reciprocity, the idea that we're all playing by a set of rules that we can all agree are fair. And that provides a stable, just foundation for society, even when we disagree about almost everything else.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Rawls's whole project is this incredibly ambitious attempt to build our entire political world on the power of our shared ability to reason. But is that enough? Is reason a strong enough foundation to hold society together against all the passions and divisions of real political life? That's a question worth thinking about.